In this tutorial, we're going to take a reference bitmap image and lay out pieces of Clipart which come free with your software to create this golf award design you see on the screen. We're going to be showing you how to use the various techniques to manipulate your Clipart to change how they fit together, creating a really nice layout which we're then going to place inside a dish. But first we need to close out of this. So we'll start now by creating a new file by going to File, New, and I'm going to want a single-sided job with a width of 8 inches, a height of 8 inches and a thickness of ½ inch, 0.5. Our Z0 position will be from the material surface, and we're going to want to make sure that our XY datum position is in the centre, and in this case we'll need a modelling resolution of high. And then we can click OK to apply that. So now that we've got our workspace, there's a number of different ways that we can start a project like this. So you can either start dragging in Clipart and manually arranging it, but in this case I'm going to import a bitmap using the import bitmap function under file operations. And with that now open, you'll see that in your tutorial files folder there's a bitmap file called Golf Award Sketches. So this is actually a photo of a hand-drawn design on paper. So if we go ahead and open that, and you'll see that then placed in the centre of your job. So one thing I just want to point out before we go any further is if you go under the Layers menu, you'll see that now you've imported the bitmap, a new layer called Bitmap Layer is automatically created with this. So if we go ahead and turn the visibility of this off and on, you'll see that there's nothing on that layer apart from the imported bitmap. And layer 1 was the blank layer which was automatically created when we started a new job. So now that we've checked those, we can click anywhere outside of the menu to close it, and we'll come back over to reselect the bitmap and we can take a look at this. So the first thing that we'll notice is that it's rotated the wrong way. So to fix that, if we left mouse click on the bitmap again to put it into transform mode, you'll see these 4 rotation handles. And if we hover our cursor over one of these points and holding down the left mouse button and the Alt key, we can start to drag that in the direction of rotation, and you'll see that it locks into these different rotation points. But of course, because the design's not actually square to the paper, we need to be a little bit more freeform with this. So we can let go of the Alt key, and then we've got a bit more control over where we place the design. So I'll just try and place that fairly level. So that's looking good, and that will place the object in its new position. We don't need to be too accurate here because we're just using this as a reference image so that we can arrange our Clipart. And at the moment it's way too small, so if we just click back on that to select the object again and left mouse click again to put that back into transform mode, you'll also see the sizing points around the edge of the object. So again, if we hover our cursor over one of these points and pressing and holding the left mouse button with the shift key at the same time, you'll see that this then rescales this from the centre of our bitmap. So I'll just keep dragging away from the centre just to grow that image. And we'll place it around here just so it's large enough, just so that we can see the layout. And also all that we need at the moment from this design is the centre piece. So there's lots of visual noise around the outside that we can get rid of. And the best way to do this is to crop our bitmap. And in order to use the crop bitmap tool, we're going to need 2 objects selected. So one being the bitmap that we're cropping, and also a closed vector to crop the bitmap too. And we can use any shape, but in this case the rectangle makes most sense just to focus in on this centre design. So under create vectors, we're going to choose the draw rectangle tool. And we're just going to come in and we're going to roughly place that rectangle around our centre design just so it encompasses and focuses in on that area, and we can let go to apply that, and then we can close out of the form. So we're just going to put that into transform mode again and just resize this just so that we're focusing in on that area and getting rid of most of the other designs on this drawing. Okay, so with this rectangular vector selected, which you can see that it is by the dotted purple line, if we then hold down the shift key and also select the bitmap in the background, we've now got the 2 objects selected so that we can use the crop bitmap tool. So we'll come over now, and under edit objects, we can use the crop bitmap tool. So if we click that, and you'll see that what's happened is that the software's deleted anything in the bitmap that's outside the boundary of that vector that we've cropped it to. And with that done, we can go ahead and delete that vector because it's no longer needed. So we'll select it and then press delete. And if we select the bitmap again, you'll see that the bounding box is skewed because it's actually remembering the orientation of the original bitmap. after we'd rotated it to line the center object up with our workspace. So to change this, with the bitmap selected, we can right click and choose Bake Rotated Bounds. And that will then snap the bounding box to the edges of the crop bitmap and realign it. So now we've done that, we can go ahead and just make that larger again. So holding down the left mouse button and the shift key again, we can just scale that up until it's roughly where we want it. So I think there looks good, and we can let go to apply that. And now we'd like to center the bitmap to the workspace. So there's a couple of different ways of doing that. We can either, with the bitmap selected, come over to transform objects and use the align selected objects and align to material, and using the center option, that'll align it to the workspace. Or we just undo that, put that back into transform mode, and we'll use this center point here, hold down the left mouse button again over that, and we can just drag that up, and with the geometry snapping on, that will just snap to the center of the workspace. And now I'm pretty happy with the placement of the bitmap. We can start to look at arranging our clip art around this. And there's many different ways of bringing 3D components into your job, but here we're just going to go through the 3 most common ways that you're probably going to use most often. And if we go over to the modeling tab, we can use this option, which is import a component to 3D model. And that'll open the file explorer from which you can navigate to wherever you've got your clip art saved on your PC. But in this case, as you can see, we've already pointed this to our tutorials folder, and we can see all 3 pieces of clip art which are needed for this project. So if we start now by double clicking the Laurel clip art, that will place it in your workspace, and you'll see that it's automatically selected and centered to the workspace. And with the clip art as well, you can use the sizing points to scale this up. So holding down the shift key and the left mouse button, we can just drag that up just to roughly where we want it. Okay, that's looking good. And then also we can center that by hovering over the center point, holding down the left mouse button, and we can just drag this up. And if we hold down the Alt key at the same time, that will drag that up in line. So it snaps to the position that you had it originally, and we can drag this up and down. So we'll just snap that to the center. And the size and alignment of that's now looking roughly where I want it to be, which means that we can move on to look at bringing in the next piece of clip art using the second method. So if we go over to the clip art tab here, click on that, and if you've installed any of the free clip art that came with the software, then this will show up under the library browser in clip art. So we can see here ribbons and banners, so we would just click on that, and we'll see the ribbon and 4 that we've just seen a second ago in the tutorial folder. But first we're going to look at adding the golf ball and tee. So for that we'd need to go under objects and people, and then you can see the golf ball and tee model there. So we'll double click that, and you can see that it's been placed again in the center of the workspace, and it's selected. So straight away you can move in and make any size adjustments that you like. So I'm just going to scale it down a little bit and just move it down, pressing the Alt key again, just to keep it in line. Using the center handle, I'm just going to scale that down a little bit more, so to about there. So I'm happy with that rough placement for now, but we can have a look at this again later just to tweak it a little bit, just to make it even better. But for now we'll just move on to bringing the third piece of clip art in, and for that we're going to look at the third method of importing 3D clip art. So also within the clip art tab, we've got the option to choose local files. So if you click on that, you'll be presented with the directory structure of your computer, and also any external drives, jump drives or USB keys that you might have in your PC where you might choose to store clip art. But as I've already pointed this to the tutorials folder, we can see that we've got the 3 pieces of clip art that we're using displayed here, and therefore I can just double click on the ribbon just to bring that in, and again it will be placed selected and centered on the workspace. So first of all, now that we've got this on the workspace, we just need to drag this down into position roughly. So again, holding the cursor over the center point, we can hold down the left mouse button and the Alt key and just drag this down roughly into position. So just a bit further down, I think around there looks okay for now. But at the moment, I can't really see how each component is interacting with each other in the 2D view. So if we just go ahead and tile our windows horizontally, we'll be displayed with the 2D view on the left hand side and the 3D view on the right. And we can see now in the 3D view that we might have some problems with the way that each component's interacting with each other that we might want to sort out. And just glancing over this, the first thing that I can see is that the stem, the bottom of the T here, is actually sticking out the wreath. So we're just going to want to bump that up slightly. So to do that, we'll just click on the component, double click. And again, in the 3D view, you can hover over the center point, holding the left-hand mouse button down and the Alt key, and we can just move this up, just so the wreath hides the bottom of the stem. And we're just going to need to size that down again now. So holding down the Shift key, we can resize that. And that looks about right there. Quite happy with that. And with that, we can move on to the second thing that we want to adjust. So down here, the ribbon should be standing proud of the laurels, and at the moment it's merging into it. So if we just select that component, ready to make some edits. But before we do that, we can just take some time just to consider how this is going to be machined into the material. So we're looking for this to be placed within a dish for something like an awards plaque or a cupboard door. So because we're going to be placing this within a dish, we're ideally going to be looking for a balance of high points throughout the components, just to make it easier for us when we're trying to place this below the material surface within the dish. And we can check this one by clicking on each component. So if we select the laurel, and when you do that, you'll see this dark blue point appear. So if we click on that, that will bring up your floating component properties. And this will show you various information about the selected component, one of which is the shape height. And we'll see that the total shape height of the wreath at the moment is 0.3332 inches. So we can just round that down now to 0.3 just to make it easier to remember when we're selecting the shape height for the rest of the components. Press the spacebar to accept that, and you'll see that it's been updated in the 3D view. And then we can move on to the ball and tee, and that's just slightly taller than the 0.3, so we'll just set that to 0.3 also. Press spacebar to accept. And looking at the ribbon model, we can see if we can actually bring this forward so it stands proud of the laurel. It might not work, but we'll just put the 0.3 shape height in there so it's all equal, and click spacebar. And actually that's brilliant, that's brought that proud of the laurel, and that's exactly where we need it, so that's perfect. So we can close out the floating component properties. Now, there is one other problem that I've spotted here, and that would be the distance between the top of the ribbon here and the bottom of the leaf on either side. So I'd be worried that my tool may not make it through this gap, and it would leave an area of material behind that I'd need to deal with later. So we can just adjust that now by changing the size of the ribbon and widening that gap. So if we use this point and click the left mouse button and drag the shape down, just altering the size slightly of the ribbon so it widens the gap. So that looks like it'll give us enough of a gap there, but in changing the shape of the component there, if we just go back into the component properties, you'll see that it's actually changed the shape height because we've essentially stretched that shape out. So after we've adjusted that, we just need to set that back to 0.3, press space just to accept that, and then we can close out the form again. I'll just go back into the tiled view now so I can see both the 2D and 3D views, and we'll just go back over to the bitmap image. Now that we've placed all of our components and assembled them, we don't actually need this bitmap, so we can go back up to the layers menu and we can just switch off the bitmap layer. So that will just hide the bitmap, showing only the components in the 2D and 3D views. As we can see in the 3D view, we've been very lucky in the way that our components have fitted together here just by changing the shape heights. But there are various other tools that you can use to change the way that the components interact with each other if you're having problems with fitting them together. So I'll just take a second just to go through a couple of these methods now. And they can be accessed through the floating component properties dialog. So if we click that blue point again to bring that dialog box up, you'll see a couple of options down here called fade and tilt. And these are really powerful tools for altering the way in which components interact with each other. So just to demonstrate this, instead of using the ribbon, we'll just close out that form and just select the laurel and bring the component dialog box up. And we'll just click on the fade option first, so we'll check that box. And that will give us the option to fade between those two anchor points by a percentage, which is set in this box. So if we just go ahead and set those two anchor points, so we'll left mouse click here to set one, and one down here as well. And that just sets the direction of the fade. And you'll see that by default it's set to 50% on the fade. So you can see that at the top here, the details still remained unchanged. But as you get closer to the bottom, for the second anchor point, it starts to fade out. So some of that detail is getting lost. So if we take a look at this closer now, it's not going to be the greatest example here because we've got such a massive difference in height between this ribbon component and the laurel. But if we just enter in, say, 25% in the fade, press the space bar to enter that, you'll see some of that detail coming back into these lower regions. And we can also try 10%. See the change it's made there. And in cases where you've got two components next to each other that are very similar in height, using the fade tool on one of them can actually dramatically alter the way that they fit together. So it is a powerful tool to use to adjust your components. But equally useful in these cases is the tilt tool as well. So we just go back into this. So the tilt will effectively angle the base height on one side. So you can see in this little diagram here. So the one side has got a much deeper base height and then it tapers down at an angle. So if we just have a look at this, just choose the tilt option and we can switch fade off for now. And we'll click set the anchor points. So again, one up here, one down there, just to set the direction. And if we just change the view to have a look at the effects of this. And this time, the parameter is the angle of the tilt. So we can just go up in small increments and try, say, 2 degrees change in there. And you'll see it's brought up the laurel on the right-hand side to cover the ribbon. And we'll just try 3%. And you'll see how much of an effect that's having in lifting the one side of the laurel. And it just shows how much of a powerful tool this is for changing the transition between two components. But in this case, we don't need either of those. So we'll just switch that off, close out of the component properties form, and we'll just change the view to look straight down at our layout again. And for the next step, we're going to want to put these components inside of a dish. So that's fairly easy. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back over to our modeling tab. And here we'll see our component tree, which lists all of our 3 Clipart components. So if we just switch the visibility of all of these off, and we can go through them. So we've got our ribbon, we've got our golf ball and tee, and we've also got the simple laurel wreath. And we can also see by this symbol here that they're all set to merge at the moment. So the first step to put this inside of a dish is to add a 0 plane. So if we click this button to add a plane component with a 0 height covering the model, and you'll see that that's now been added in on the 3D view, but you can't see it on the 2D view. And that's because it's not actually represented on the same layer. So it's actually been placed on a new layer called 0 plane, and you can see at the moment the visibility is turned off. We can switch that on, and as you can see, it'll fill up the workspace and represent the 0 plane, but it might actually block the visibility of some of our components in the 2D view. So that's why it's automatically switched off, because it doesn't really serve any purpose in the 2D view. But we do need the 0 plane in here to help us with some of the issues that we might run into later when we're looking to add our toolpaths. So now to add in the dish component, we're going to go over to our Clipart tab again, and we're going to need our library browser, where we'll be looking for domes. And we're going to bring in this flat round circle, so we'll just double click on that to place that on the workspace again. And again, that will be centered and selected. So it looks okay in the 2D view, but obviously you can see there's an issue here in the 3D view. So to fix that, we need to go back into our modeling tab, and we need to look to change the combine mode of this flat round circle component. So there are a few ways to do this. You can either double click the component, go into the component properties here, and choose the subtract combine mode here instead of merge as it's currently set to. Or you can right click on the flat round circle, and from this list combine mode and select subtract from there. Or alternatively, we can use the floating component properties dialog, and we can change it here as well. So I'm just going to change it there. And you can see the combine modes change, so we can close out the dialog box. So now we can see it starting to take shape, but the design doesn't quite fit inside the dish. So we just need to go ahead and resize that. So going to either the 2D or the 3D view here, and just using these points here. And if we hold down the shift key, so it grows it out from the center, just until we cover the entire design. But in this case, I know the exact size I'd like this dish to be. So if we just double click on that, put that into transform mode, we'll go back over to the drawing tab. And under transform objects, we can use the set selected object size to enter into there, or with the object selected, we could have just pressed T on the keyboard to get into the set size tool. And we're going to keep the X and Y linked here, and we're just going to enter into X 7.5. So it's linked that with Y, and then we can click apply, and then we can close out of that form. So that's all looking good, but we can see that the ribbon still isn't quite fitting inside the dish. So first of all, we're just going to go back up to the modeling tab, and we'll just deselect the flat round circle, so we'll make that invisible for a second. And we're going to do a couple of things. So I'm just going to adjust this ribbon slightly. So I'm just going to change the length of that slightly by holding down Shift. That will stretch it out from the center, just so it's slightly wider to match the edges of the wreath. And I'm going to bump it up just a little bit, just using the up arrow on the keyboard, and that's looking a little bit better. And the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to select these three components. So we're going to select the simple laurel wreath, and then holding down Shift, we'll select the golf ball and tee and also the ribbon. And we need a way of making all of these individual components one item, one object. So one way that we can do that is by right clicking, and we'll go down to group, select that, and then that will combine all those three items into one object. So now we can select it in the 3D and the 2D view, and you can see that the boundary box has changed to surround all of those components. And over here it's combined them into one group. So if we just click the minus there to collapse it, you'll see that those three Clipart components are actually under one group header. So that means that anything that we do to this group now, changing the size or the shape, it will affect all three together. And you'll also notice by doing that the model in the 2D view is now updated to reflect what we see in the 3D view. So now the ribbon is actually in front of the wreath, and also the T's merging in better with the laurel at the bottom here. So if we just go ahead and switch the dish back on, just to see what we're working with. So now that we can see the area that we're trying to fit it to, we can double click to select those components together, the group, and then holding down Shift, we can drag that in to resize it until it all fits inside, and then we can alter the position by using the arrows on the keyboard. And that's just a way of eyeballing it, or alternatively we could go back into the drawing tab and use the align selected objects tool, and with both the group and the dish selected, we can use the align to selection, and we'll choose to center them against each other. So press that, and that position now looks perfect. Now the next thing that we need to think about is, because this is going to be cut below the surface of the material, we might as well utilise as much of the material thickness as we can. So we just close out of that. I'm just going to select the dish again, and just going back over to the modelling tab and going into the component properties, I just want to have a look to see how deep our dish is going to be. And we can see here under shape height, it's going to be 0.3386 inches. So if we just simplify that, just round it down to 0.3 of an inch, and close out of that. And we can also take a look at the components as well. Just go back into the component properties for these as a group, and we can see that's at 0.2671 inches. And if we think about it, we're going to want the shape height of the components to be lower than the surface of the material, so we don't want it to be standing proud of the dish. So just slightly under, so we'll just leave a 0.02 allowance. So if we put that to 0.28, and then we can close out of the form and have a look in our 3D view. So we'll just move this round, and just looking down at that, it does look like it's below the surface of our material, but we can't see for sure. So back to the modelling tools, and we'll have a look at the scale Z height model. So if we click into that to open the form, and this tells us that the current height of the model is 0.3 inches, the minimum Z height is minus 0.3 inches, and the maximum is the material surface. So this is showing us that there isn't anything above the surface of our material or our modelling plane. So that's all looking good, and we can exit out of that form. And the last thing that we're going to look at here is just adding some text onto the ribbon for our golf award. And for this, we're going to use a V-carving strategy. So first I'm just going to maximise the 2D view. I'm going to go back into the drawing tab. We can either come up here to zoom active view to drawing limits, or we can just press F on the keyboard. And now, under create vectors, we're going to choose the polyline tool, And we're just going to draw in a rough line here, just from there, and then snap that to the centre when you see the centre line appear. Just left mouse click. Okay, and with that selected, if I hold down the Control, Shift and H key at the same time, it will make a mirror copy of that over to the other side of the job. Alternatively, we could use the Mirror Selected Objects tool, but in this case it's much easier to just use the shortcut. So I'll just go over how to do that again. So if you just hold down Shift and H, you'll see that it copies it to the other side, but it doesn't preserve the existing vector. Just undo that. If you hold down just Control and H, then it will flip it about the vector's centre. And the H in this case stands for horizontal. So if we wanted to copy that vertically, then we just do the same, but with the V key. So we'll do Shift and V, and you'll see that that's copied that vertically about the job centre. So I'll just undo that. And then again, Control, Shift and V will preserve the existing vector. So I'll just go ahead and put that back to where I had it. So Control, Shift and H. And I'm fairly happy with the placement to that now, but I do want it to follow the curved edge of the ribbon. So to do that, we're just going to delete that copy back out for a second. Zoom in on this vector, and we're going to select it and hit N on the keyboard to put that into node editing mode. And then with that selected, we're just going to click the right mouse button, and we'll be presented with a number of options. And in this case, we're going to want to convert that to a Bezier curve. So we can click that, or alternatively with it selected, just hit B on the keyboard. And once you've done that, we'll be presented with a number of control points and handles. So we can manipulate these to try and match that curved edge. Let's move that up, it's looking good. Can actually go ahead and move these points down to the edge of the ribbon so we can better match it. Move that down, move this up slightly. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that now, so we can go back into selection mode, and with that still selected, we'll hit Control, Shift and H again to copy it to the other side. Move that point back slightly. So back into selection mode, and with both of these vectors selected, I'm going to hit the right mouse key, and we're going to want to join close vectors. And in this case, we're going to move the endpoints to join them. So you'll see once we've done that, we've actually created one continuous smooth curve. And with that done, we can then double click on it again to put it back into selection mode. And I just want to nudge it up slightly, so I'm just going to use the up arrow on the keyboard, just to give myself a bit of a border to place the text on. And now we've got the curve vector to apply it to, we can go under Create Vectors, we'll go on the Draw Text tool again. And at the top of the form, you'll see the dialog where you can enter in your text. So in this case, we're going to enter hole in one. We'll keep to Arial. We're going to want it bold. So we'll check that. Text alignment in the center, and text height, we'll put that at about 0.35. And that looks about right now to wrap along this curve. So we'll just click close on the form. And now we can look to place that along this curve. So to do that, we're going to need both objects selected. So the curved vector, and then holding down Shift, we'll select the text as well. And in this case, we're going to come under Create Vectors again, and we're going to be using the Text on a Curve tool. So we just enter into that form, and you'll see that it's immediately been placed along that curve. And the form gives you a number of options. So text size, we can either maintain the existing text size, or we can scale it to fill the curve. So here we've got the slider to increase and decrease the text size. But in this case, we're just going to stick with the existing text. Text spacing's looking fine. We're going to want it above the curve, so that's in the correct position. So we don't need to worry about these, but just click through them. So that's on the curve. So that's centered it on the line. And then below, obviously below the line, just put that back. It's not quite centered in the ribbon, so we're going to want to give it a slight offset distance. So I don't know how much to offset it by, so we'll just start with 0.1 first. And that's bumped it to the top edge, so that's too much. So we'll try 0.05. And that's looking great. That seems to be placed in the center of the ribbon, or as close as we need it to be anyway. And just to mention it quickly, sometimes when you first enter into this form, the text can be flipped on the opposite side of the line. So you may need to use this option, text on the other side, to correct it. So if we just click that, so you'll see that it's placed it on the other side. So sometimes when you first enter into the form, it can appear like this. And then in that case, you check text on the other side to correct it. But because this time it came in the right place anyway, we don't need to check text on the other side. So that's in the right position. And we can close out of the form. And with the text being the last step in this, we can zoom active view to draw in limits again, just so we can have a look at the whole design. And that's now ready for toolpathing. So that's actually covered in a separate tutorial video, which is available through the related video section of this tutorial. So for now, we can just go ahead and save this. We're going to go File, Save As, and in this case, I'm going to name it golfaward.crv, and then we can just click Save. And that's all ready now for the later toolpathing tutorial.